My name is Thom Ernst. Just a little bit about me. I was the host of Saturday Night Movies for a number of years. I'm a Toronto film critic, and I am fortunate enough to be invited up to Sudbury almost every year that there's not a pandemic to do these kind of things and to introduce movies. And it's been a highlight. Well, who kid? Yeah. No, hosting Saturday Night Movies has been my highlight. This is the second highlight. Whenever I talk horror films with people involved in the business, I like to point out that my bucket list is to be a victim in a horror movie. I have mentioned and have been promised by Chad Archibald, Mickey Moran, Audrey Cummings, everyone they've not come through. So it's up to you guys now. I'm going to introduce our panel today. Right beside me, I believe this is Andrew Thomas Hunt, with more than 20 years in the industry. He's a writer, producer, director, editor. He has made 3 feature films, and he was a catalyst for Raven Banner Entertainment, one of those things that come up on your screen when you know you're about to watch a great horror film. And they became the leading distributor of genre films, including The Breach, which is screening tonight, or tomorrow evening at this festival. You have my eternal gratitude for Psycho Gorman, by the way. One of the best movies my daughter and I sat through, and we love it, and we watch it periodically. Next in line here, we have Mark. Peter. I got Peter, sorry. Peter, and can you help me with the last name? Mahajcik. Peter Mahajcik is a production designer, born in Sudbury, and are you still residing here?
No, I reside in Toronto.
You reside in Toronto, so there goes my next line, which is you don't have to leave your hometown for the business, but he'll talk more about that. But as I think more films are being made in Northern Ontario, it is probably likely that that will be the case. Your credits include a Resident Evil, Welcome to Raccoon City. Got the wrong one again. Let's do this again. Your credits include Cursed Films from Shudder. That's in the Shudder. Yes, got that one right. Rabid, which is the Cronenberg remake by the Soska sisters, I believe. And also VHS 94, which had another installment this year at a smaller festival just to the south of us. Now let's go to the next person in line, which I know I have right now when I call him Mark Kowalski.
Yes, hello, nice to meet you.
Oh, it's nice to meet you too. Mark's credits include, and you may have heard this before when I introduced Peter, Resident Evil, Welcome to Raccoon City, and on a very different end, The Apostle Peter, Redemption, and Joseph and Mary, which I'm going to assume is a Christmas movie.
No, actually it was a period piece set in Jerusalem at the time of Jesus.
Yeah, I'm going to call that a Christmas movie.
Okay, fair enough. It was shot in the middle of winter in Northern Ontario, made as a desert.
There you go.
There you go.
And at the end, last but not least, as they say, Michelin Blaze from Cast North. Years as a producer and casting director, and your credits include Kicking Blood, one of the most unique vampire movies I've seen in a long time. Fixation, which is a recent film. Welcome to Raccoon City, and most recently, Zombie Town. Although maybe Fixation is also a very recent one. My favorite title of yours, though, is Pride, Prejudice, and Mistletoe. So I love that. And you've created more than 400 jobs in the area and have been instrumental in getting people their actor cards, which we'll discuss how important that is. Okay. So there is our panel, and I think I'd love to start off with you, Andrew, being right to my left. How did you get into this career? How did Raven Banner come to be, and its continued success?
All right, I'll try to give the shortest answer to the longest question. I knew I wanted to get into film from the age of 16 when I saw the films of David Cronenberg, of course, you know, classic Canadian horror director. You know, went to school, studied media. In the 90s, I became a music video commercial director and kind of worked my way through that industry, got into broadcast. But along my journey, I never kind of got the opportunity to, of course, direct a feature film. So at one point, I guess about 14 years ago now, me and a couple old friends decided, hey, let's make a movie together. I basically remortgaged my condo, and we made this little independent film for $100,000. And I still live in that condo, so that was successful. And basically off the back of that, then we decided to start Raven Banner Entertainment, because when we turned to the industry as to where we were going to sell this film, we didn't really see a lot of players that kind of fit what we were doing and what we wanted to do, so we said we'll do it ourselves. And so 13 years ago, Raven Banner Entertainment was born as a worldwide sales company specializing in genre films. And we would acquire other filmmakers' films like Chad Archibald's films from Black Fawn, and then other filmmakers from around the world. And then as we turned to the Canadian marketplace to look at who we would sell these films to in Canada, like we were selling them around the world, but when we turned to the Canadian marketplace, there wasn't really a great buyer for it. Even though there was great distributors, there were no distributors in Canada that respected genre. And so we said, to hell with it, we'll start our own distribution company. And so that's how Raven Banner Releasing was formed, was to kind of answer that question of where we're going to release these films. And along the way, we acquired films that maybe we wouldn't pick up for sales, but we certainly picked up for Canadian distribution, such as Autopsy of Jane Doe or The Vigil. And then along the way, we also started executive producing films like Psycho Gorman and Turbo Kid and other great genre films. But we always knew that we wanted to get back into production. So about 4 years ago, we founded Hangar 18 Media in partnership with a friend of ours, Pasha Patriki, who ran a post-production facility. And then we started producing films. So we've produced well over 24 films as executive producers. And then within Hangar 18, at this point, I think we've produced 10 films in the last 3 years. Many of which have been shot up here in Northern Ontario. Spare Parts, we shot in Sudbury. The Breach in Parry Sound. The Fight Machine, also in Parry Sound. We shot Junction Row recently up north, and that's in post-production. And then I got back behind the camera as director again for a couple of those films. So yeah, we've been spinning a lot of plates, doing a lot of things, but that's the shortest answer to that question of how I got into the industry. Yeah.
And just to follow up on something you said, you mentioned that there really wasn't a place that respected genre film enough to actually distribute them. But what about Cronenberg and that base that he laid? Did he break ground there, or did you actually have to build up even higher than that?
Well, that kind of raises like another question in and of itself, in that there's a lot of great filmmakers when you look at the history of film, and I'm sure you know this, Francis Ford Coppola, Scorsese, Peter Jackson, Sam Raimi, so many filmmakers, great filmmakers, James Cameron, they all got their start doing genre films. And of course they've, upped the ante along the way, and they have become more respected over the years. So certainly when Cronenberg first started, he wasn't the David Cronenberg that is loved and respected today. His films were considered a little schlocky, and he kind of then rose above that. And so there was still, for the longest time, this mentality that genre films are schlocky, that they're B grade. And you even see it in such things as, even to this day, telefilm, the main funding source for Canadian films, still doesn't really like to touch genre films. And so, a lot of these we have this weird mentality in Canada, or certainly within the Canadian film industry, that genre films are like, we don't want to touch them. So you'd have people like Mongrel or Alliance or E1 or Elevation. Like, a lot of these companies didn't want to touch genre films. And I should say that when we started Raven Banner, there wasn't like, Elevation wasn't in the industry at that point. Like, there was a transitionary period where Alliance was kind of folding. They had bought Maple, and there's a bunch of amalgamation and or companies folding. So there was a hole in the marketplace at that time. But yeah, a lot of those companies, they just saw genre films as beneath them.
And that brings up a good question that I think I'm going to direct to you, Michelin, in the fact that genre films are also thought of as a great entering point for filmmakers, And I wonder if that's justifiable. I mean, is it necessarily an entry point? Is it not a good destination?
I think it's both, actually. And I think it depends on the individual who, you know, some people just absolutely love doing strictly horror or strictly Christmas movies. But I'd say the Christmas movies shot in Northern Ontario, great training ground. It's a cookie cutter formula in terms of how the shows are made. You're always going to have challenges, but it's a model for a network show. And being involved in all of those Christmas movies, I have to thank the people who brought those Christmas movies here, because it's been training ground for so many people in the industry. When you do a Christmas film, you're never the same. No, I'm just kidding. But it's, you know, it's a typical, there's a Christmas market and Santa Claus and you know, this real feel-good moment. You know, people will say, oh, I'm so sick of Christmas. But if you're a Christmas lover, the films are great. And the reach worldwide for this genre of film is mind-blowing to me. Every country in the world, so much demand for content on those shows. They're doing a Christmas in July streaming. Right. So, you know, they must be doing something right.
So is that the same for horror genre then? Or is one more appealing on a world market than others?
Well, the Christmas movies have a big Christian base of viewership, right? And I'm not sure that the horror genre has the same base. However, there is a huge demand for horror genre as well. So to compare the two, it's like apples and oranges. You have a huge demand for horror, and you have a huge demand for this wholesome content for families and individuals. So I think it's a win-win for both Christmas and horror.
If I may jump in, one of the reasons that we got into the genre space is because genre films, more than any other, travel internationally regardless of language barrier. Yeah. Right? So you know, even if you look at comedies, you know, here in Canada, obviously we speak English, so they do in the UK and they do in Australia, but you don't see a lot of Australian comedies traveling even within our country or UK. Like you know, sure, we like Monty Python, but it's not universally loved across the board. It's a very, you know, particular I don't know, audience, if you will. So even amongst comedy, even when they're speaking the same language, what I'm saying is that those films don't necessarily travel well, but horror always travels well regardless of language, right? And then in the last 10 years, as we've moved into this whole Marvel, you know, very kind of formulaic, big budget, blockbuster films, horror films in particular have become kind of the place where artistic art house filmmakers can go to make something that actually generates revenue, right? So we've seen a renaissance of, you know, smart, artsy horror genre films in the last 10 years. So anyway.
Absolutely, and I'll just point out that without going too far away from the northern aspect of this conversation, but guys like John Sayles would write horror films and to make money, and this has happened again and again. But I did want to sort of go back to making movies in the north, and I made the mistake of assuming that you still lived in the north and working, but with the conversation that we've heard so far with the films coming up here and you know, working with the crews up here, etc., is it possible, can you foresee yourself being able to live here and work here and make a living out of it?
Well, definitely. I mean, the move is recent, like in the last couple months.
Oh,
so
I wasn't entirely wrong.
No, you're not entirely wrong. But yes, I mean, I do see it. In fact, you know, the next feature that I'm working on is shooting in North Bay, so I'll be back in a couple weeks, basically.
So, and is it a horror film or you're?
It's pretty dark fiction, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about what the North has to offer, and at least from your perspective. you know, the seasons. Does that work for us or against us?
Well, I mean, traditionally the winter works against us. I always tell, young writers and that sort of thing to write their scripts for the winter, because then they're more likely to get made. Just because it is a gap that in a season that we offer in abundance up here. So, the summer season, it's like anywhere else. Like I think North Bay at one point had 6 productions overlapping each other. Going at the same time, and there's no way that we have that much crew.
So how does the community of these places, if the community is smaller and they have 6 productions going on, are they welcoming this, or is there an element of being invaded, perhaps?
I haven't experienced the invaded thing. I think everybody's still really excited that this is a new industry coming to their communities. Yeah.
Okay. That's good news. Is that your?
I'm bursting to comment on that.
Yeah, I could tell. Like you practically came over and hit me with the mic.
All of Northern Ontario is extremely welcoming to the film production. And we've found over the years that the more information that is shared with the communities, the more excited they get about film production coming in, because we involve them. And that's one of the things that we have done over the years is community building and community partnerships, support with NOHFC, with the city. It creates a lot of jobs in the area and a lot of seasonal work for students, for retirees, for part-time employees. So it is very much welcomed. You'll get the odd one or two, I'm going to say cranky pants, individual who wants nothing to do with film and television whatsoever, but the communities as a whole and the majority are really very welcoming.
And do you get most of your extras from that community then?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So in about, the last 10 years, almost 10 years, I've hired over 16,000 extras for productions in Northern Ontario. Wow. And then we have repeats. The people keep coming back. They work part-time, so they supplement part-time. So we're very fortunate. We started out with hardly anybody in kind of guerrilla style. Hey, do you want to be in a movie? Or walking through the mall, you look great, do you want to be in a movie? To the point where people are waiting for the shows to start up again and get working, so.
Wow. You have been quiet so far, so we're going to bring you into the conversation. Sure. And I asked about the seasons, etc. What about in what you do, masking the environment, making it look like something else?
Well, that's part of the movie magic that we have here, whether it be through CG effects or actually set dressing or design of the location. Now, there's always tricks of the camera to do that. We've got a great special effects, couple of effects teams here that when it is actually supposed to be winter, we do those in the summer. And so there's bring out the snow blankets, and there are ways to mask the trees, but it really is at that end of the day the design of the location that you have to take care of. Now, when you referenced the Peter the Apostle, that was actually the reverse of it. So, we remove the snow and then mask it in a different way. So it really does come down to between the set dressing, effects, CG, and then the design of the film that creates the world for the filmmakers to play in.
So I want to make sure I have this straight. So you shot in the winter, a summer scene in the winter.
Absolutely.
See, that sounds like it might be counterproductive.
It may, but again, part of that was the timing of when scripts come out, when funding envelopes come out, and when funding envelopes come out, and then when the time to just have a full-out crew to be available. Now, I can't speak on the producers of what their schedules were, but it happened that it was a winter scenario. But the majority of that show was done in studio as well, with tunnels and be it palaces. And what we did take outside, a rock quarry really does look like Jerusalem at one point. And you can find those. And then at that point, it wasn't snowing yet. But, you know, sometimes you get surprised by a Canadian winter and a northern winter as well.
Yeah, I just sort of ask this generally if anybody who wants to chime in on this, but that could be a conceivable problem, is that coming up here and thinking you've got a schedule, and all of a sudden it snows for 4 or 5 days. And, you know, I mean, how has that affected anyone here? How has that affected your productions?
Well, I can comment on that, where we actually had propane tanks going on one show, and I wasn't responsible for that. I wasn't producing on it, but we had to melt the snow to stay consistent. So the propane tanks were out, and snow was getting melted because it was supposed to be a fall movie. So, yeah, the challenges are there, but, you know, as creative people in this industry, we are always trying to find creative solutions to our problem. How else can we do it, right?
Mm-hmm. Anybody else want to comment on that?
Yeah, we just shot a film up north called Junction Row, and I think they did 2 days of shooting, exterior shooting, and again, there was no snow, and then one night it just dumped a bunch of snow, and they had to continue the exterior shooting, and so now that's being handled in VFX. The snow is being added. Yeah, but, you know, to Michelin's point, it's like, you know, filmmaking is creative problem solving every step of the way. Like, you're at point A, you want to get to point Z, and all these obstacles pop up in your way along your journey, and you got to figure it out. And if you don't, that's when films crash and burn, and your career gets derailed. So, yeah, it's always about creative problem solving every step of the way.
Yeah, your career gets derailed just for that moment. It's easy to get back on the rails, is it not?
For some, more than others, yes,
Okay.
yeah.
You were nodding your head during that. Did all that sound familiar to you?
Oh, very familiar. Yeah, you're only as good as your last movie, really, right?
Yeah. Yes, that's true. And the productions that come here, well, there was a time when Canada was known for its film crews, and people came up to use Canadian film crews. That actually might be before your time. I remember that this was quite the thing, that for some reason Canadian crews were considered exceptional. Is that still the case? Are you going to say anything else?
Well, of course.
Absolutely. The Canadian film industry has been around for, well over 30, 40, 50 years, 60 years. So there are seasoned veterans, and it's funny, it's actually almost a brain drain of talented people that travel the world also and get taken away from Canada. But I'm sure if we do a count of how many Canadians are in Hollywood, we would be quite surprised. So, I mean, and that's not just in Los Angeles or anything, it's strictly right around the world. And I truly believe that that's some of the reasons why we even have our co-productions, because of our solid foundation in the crews and the talent and the product as a cultural export.
So what do you think that is? I mean, why do you think the crews are exceptional up here? Is it the change of weather? Is it the creative need because of things like that?
Well,
Yeah,
our Canadian dollar is a lot less than other parts of the world, and sure.
Well, that's the financial reason.
yeah. Well, obviously the exchange rate is good, tax credits are good, incentives are good. But then I think when they get up here and they just see how hardworking the crews are, how talented the actors and actresses are, it's everything. It all comes together to work in our favor. And I live in Toronto, and just last month, literally 2 blocks from my house, Arnold Schwarzenegger was shooting a Netflix series, and or the TV show, one of my favorites, The Boys on Amazon, is all shot in Toronto. Like, there's always productions happening here. They're always using our amazing talent to make them look good. And I think I heard a statistic, and I don't know if this is correct or not, but within the next 5 years, there's going to be more studio space and more Hollywood production shooting in Toronto than in actually Los Angeles. So that says something.
But we want to get it out of Toronto and move it up north, though. Are there going to be studios up here eventually?
There may be. I know that there's smaller independent studios, and we actually shot in Perry Sound. We shot in like kind of a de facto studio. It was a former warehouse turned studio, and it worked beautifully for us. But again, it's one of those things where financing a film is difficult, and any incentives or anything that can help finance a film is obviously welcomed. And so again, going back into the genre space, genre films are usually lower budgeted films, and so anything that can help them get made is welcomed. And so shooting up north is great because of course it's a little bit cheaper to get, say, locations, and plus some of the locations up here lend themselves very well to horror films. There's a lot of films that of course take place in the woods, and you can't shoot the woods in Toronto, right? And so again, the regional incentives, the additional tax credits that you get from shooting outside the GTA, all these things add up to make the north a very feasible and attractive place to shoot a genre film.
But is it feasible and attractive for marquee names? Can you get the marquee names up here?
I don't know, Mark, can we get the marquee names up here?
I think so. We just had Dan Aykroyd here and Chevy Chase. We just wrapped up a film on that with Zombie Town. And, even if we look at some of their interviews, they're actually very versed in Sudbury. And surprisingly, Dan Aykroyd was quite, as he said, he wants to come back and film. But, so what all of this is actually now putting a spotlight onto Northern Ontario as these bigger acts come up and bigger names, and that's just one example of recent, but maybe you can speak on some of the other talent that's come up here as well, and even in earlier days of filming.
Absolutely, and just even backtracking on the question about studios, there is an existing studio in Sudbury. There's another smaller one in North Bay. There's announcement of one opening in Sault Ste. Marie. Some more studio space apparently in North Bay, and it's all speculation, but everybody is in expansion mode. And with the support of the provincial and federal governments, they're also seeing the need and how it is creating another sub-economy. Film and television is not something new. The money is being spent in Northern Ontario, jobs are being created, so it makes sense for everybody to look at, hey, how can we expand? It's still developing, if that makes sense. Yeah. But the next step of that is the marquee names you were mentioning. There's a lot of talent that's come up north over the years for that one-off experience, and then they come back. And some very successful series have also developed out of Northern Ontario with the help of the NOHFC, with Scion, with local producers and people from the region really pushing for these shows to happen. Peter Mahayachuk has a studio here in Sudbury. So those are really relevant questions, and the answer is yes, yes, and yes. Wow. Yeah.
Peter, tell us a little bit about your studio.
It's just a little space, but it's about a 10,000 square foot building. Primarily, I had invested in it for my own projects, and that, so I had my own space to work and play, as it were. But over the last year and a half, I've rented it to a few movie productions that have come through, and that, because we have office space as well as the studio space in place.
So it sounds like a lot of these things, Raven Banner and your studio space, came out of a necessity to promote or work on your own projects, and that it's grown from there. So that speaks, I think, to some level about homegrown projects and personal projects.
And I have to give credit and kudos also to Hideaway Pictures and Northern Ontario Film Studios, because they established a studio here in Sudbury and really created a lot of jobs for many of us. Those training ground shows. Are other studios coming into play? Absolutely. The playing field is quite large in the north, and there's a lot of opportunity for not just one studio. They can't service everything, you know, and that's what the reality is of the North. We had such a hard time crewing up our show Zombie Town because there's, you know, 5 shows happening all at once in the North. We had to import a lot of crew from Toronto, from Halifax, and make it work. You have deliverables. You've got to get your show done. And, you know, when everything is crossing over like that, it's really difficult to find local talent. I don't know anybody who wasn't working this summer in film and television who's been pushing for their career here. Yeah.
Was that also the case during the pandemic? Was it the film industry continued on?
Well, actually, it did quite vehemently actually up here, and I know, I believe, actually it was Hideaway Pictures that was doing one of the first pandemic shows with the Christmas show, followed up by Resident Evil, which is in some ways a movie about a pandemic that creates zombies in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah, it was kind of a weird show to be
That was
on.
quite interesting. But, you know, even in more so during the pandemic, I think that created the need for more studio space as well, and policies to create during a pandemic. And with there was a call from the DGC actually to all people of spurring more studio space, and then just because of the busyness of each major center, and that including Vancouver and Toronto, you know, Calgary. I mean, they have a nice studio system as well. So it's allowing now Northern Ontario to reap the rewards of years gone by of Canadian filmmaking, and in turn, you know, pushing studio builds.
We shot the film The Breach up here September 2020. So I guess about 6 months after the pandemic started. And we actually, we shot it in Parry Sound, and we basically moved the entire cast and crew into a Motel 8. And we shot all around their grounds, and we turned their little hotel ballroom into our studio set. So everybody was bubbled in that environment. No one could come and go. And it became very much a family kind of feeling. We had a projector, and on our weekends off, we created a little drive-in theater in the parking lot. And we all ate together and slept there and worked there. And it was actually a really great way of working. And in some sort of way, I think it would have been harder to have done in the city. You know, the fact that we could be up here and shoot and be bubbled as we're trying to figure out how to operate within this pandemic. And we then actually took that kind of model, and when we shot VHS 94 down in Burlington, by again putting everybody, all cast and crew, into a hotel where they lived, and they shot. We built the sets in there, and some sets were built outside, but yeah, it was a great way of shooting. But if anything that the pandemic showed us, beyond that people hoard toilet paper, is that people need entertainment. And, you know, even when they're not working, they're not making money, they want to be entertained. They want to watch films. And so film production, if anything, has really ramped up since, you know, the pandemic.
You said earlier that there is no way, I'm going all the way to the end here again, that you could, no one studio could facilitate everything. Did you mean by numbers or just by projects, like they couldn't do perhaps a CGI and they can't, as well as something else? Or is it just sheer numbers that they couldn't handle?
I think a little bit of both. For example, we just wrapped up on Zombie Town. Studio was rented. There's 2 Christmas movies shooting in town. So it can only accommodate, the studio could only accommodate 1 crew at a time, right? Manpower-wise, we're sharing as much as we can from production to production crew. Our show's wrapped. Hey guys, this whole department is available if you need some help. And that's one of the beautiful things about Northern Ontario, is connecting with other productions and being able to, you know, try and help your neighbors out. And, you know, we have an experienced AD team. They just wrapped up. Can you guys use them? You know, and yeah, for the studio space, we're limited with space, and that's the reality. So the opportunity for new studios to come in makes a difference, but we're also very resilient in Northern Ontario. If the studio doesn't exist, we're still going to be able to make a movie and rent different spaces. You just have to get creative.
Just to chime in on this, at one point there were no real studios in Toronto as well. There were warehouses, empty buildings, and there's still a way of making films without having the big studios. And it also takes a certain production to require a studio as well. Not all productions require that. A lot of, and what we're finding here in Northern Ontario is a lot of location shoots, a lot of, in the woods, and using the natural resources to the advantage of the filmmakers. But comes a time where now, saying that as Northern Ontario has been, focused to the world, these bigger shows are coming, and they will require these.
Yeah, further to that point, as he said, you don't need studios to make a great film. Obviously, the original Evil Dead was shot in a high school gymnasium, as was the movie Home Alone, right? Like this, what became a big Hollywood blockbuster comedy was shot in an empty school during summer, right? So
I had no idea. Wow,
Well, and
Evil Dead. Wow.
Both Evil Dead and Home Alone were shot in high school gymnasiums. Yeah.
I hope they were shot at the same time. That could,
Sadly not. Yeah, about 10 years apart, but still, yeah.
But even Junction Row, I did casting for that show for you guys, and using a decommissioned site as one of the major locations, like there's empty buildings all over Northern
Yeah.
Ontario. So it's kind of cool.
And that is-
they had
that-
so much fun on that show
And
as
that's
well.
production value that you can't build, right? That's like something that's existing. We can move in there, we can kind of dress it a little bit, and suddenly it gives, the value is up there on the screen. When we shot Spare Parts here in Sudbury, it was a stupidly ambitious film that basically took place in a auto wrecking yard turned gladiator arena. And we found a company here in Sudbury that owned a lot that had a bunch of wrecked cars on it and said, hey, can we shoot there? Yeah, sure. Can we build an arena using your wrecked cars? Yeah, sure. And that was it. It was off we went. We built this arena literally with, about 100 cars all piled on top of each other in a big circle. And again, we could never have done that, certainly not for the budget that we had, anywhere other than, a place like Sudbury. Because again, people are open, they're willing, they're wanting to help out, they want to get involved. And and that's what I love about it. It's, the necessity is the mother of invention, as they say, right? And so, yeah.
So will the sort of the axle of filmmaking and business and all those things shift north as this continues on? Is that a possibility? Eventually this will be, when they say Hollywood North, they're going to really mean Hollywood North?
Productions will always be coming up here for a multitude of reasons, for the people, for the locations, for the environments, for the incentives, everything. Everything makes shooting up north appealing. And so, from the smallest independent film to a big Hollywood production will, be shot up here. Again, it's just, if it makes sense, it'll be done here.
Where was Psycho Gorman shot?
Psycho Gorman was shot, I believe, in Burlington, Hamilton area, or St. Catharines area.
Then
yeah.
we won't talk about it.
Okay,
then.
yeah.
Yeah, we'll drop that one. Good movie, though. We are going to go to the audience for questions in a few moments. I just have a few more things I wanted to bring up and discuss. One of the things is we talked about how making these genre films can lead to other things or finance other things. Now, I can't remember the director's name, and I'm sure, or possibly people on this panel will know who I'm talking about. A gentleman, and again, I think it was a gentleman, made Anything for Jackson, which is a great, great horror film. But it was his project, like his love project, as it were. And aside from that, he makes Hallmark movies. So the reverse, do you know who I'm referring to?
Yeah, I know him, and I'm blanking on his name because, of course, you're putting me on the spot. But yes, he did a lot of Hallmark Christmas movies, and then this was a passion project of his. I want to say Justin Kelly.
Yeah, I think that's it. But we won't blame you if you look at your cell phones and help us out here. The movie's called Anything for Jackson.
Anything with Jackson. It starred Sheila McCarthy and, of course, Julian Richings. Yeah.
That's right. And that just surprised me because he was making these Christmas Hallmark movies. Specifically, that was his gig. And then he did this. So, but is there sort of, is it offensive at any level for any of you that have made your career in genre films to hear references of these movies as if they're being ghettoized, that they're lesser than?
If you're in this business and you get offended by comments, you shouldn't be in this business. Because you will get the critics, you'll get the beefs and the bouquets all the time. And, you know, I think it's really about your mindset and attitude. Obviously, you make a film, you would like to get the accolades, but the reality is, if you can't handle the criticism, you're in the wrong business. Because it is a very critical business, unfortunately.
Well, sorry, I was just going to say, you know, unless you're a trust fund baby, everybody has to work for a living. And so, you know, if your work for a living is making Hallmark movies, that's not a bad gig. You know what I mean? It's better than, I don't know, digging ditches, I guess. I don't know. But again, everyone has to work for a living. And, you know, for us, thankfully, we run Raven Banner as a company. And so, but again, we do a lot: sales, distribution, production. The pieces of the pie are getting smaller and smaller. And so you have to kind of make up more, you know, pies to get a full piece. But yeah, you know, there's absolutely nothing wrong with making a living making, you know, Hallmark movies.
You were going to add something.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, one of the things that both genres have in common, I think, is even if you make it badly, it's a very forgiving and accepting, you know, crowd that you're making these films for. And I mean, sometimes that even makes it more legendary, right?
Well, and every great artist usually has to start somewhere, and you learn by making mistakes. You learn from your errors. You get better along the way. And in fact, if anything, I think there's a curse, you know, maybe the Citizen Kane curse of like your first film being like so damn good that where do you go from there? You know, so again, when you look at the work of somebody like Cronenberg or Scorsese or Francis Ford Coppola, you know, some of the greatest, their first, you know, 2-3 films weren't that great. You know, they all got better as they went along. So, you know, any kind of film that you're going to do is hopefully you're going to learn from it and grow from it and build your muscles. And if you don't, well, then maybe, you know, maybe it's, you're in the wrong business. Yeah.
Bees in your bouquet, you say. I like that. One last thing I wanted to suggest is, or ask about, is now that the Indigenous community is getting more, their voices are being heard, and they're making films that sort of break out of even the Indigenous voice, things like Blood Quantum, you know, making horror films, like, is that a result of the projects moving up north, or is them making films going to help projects move up north? And when I say them, you know, filmmakers, you know, Indigenous filmmakers.
I think storytelling in the Indigenous communities is nothing new. You know, and, you know, being able to have a voice and a platform even more so now. It's again about, you know, diversity and representation on screen. And, you know, it seems to be the topic of conversation everywhere these days. It's important. We don't live in a plain Caucasian world, and I don't mean that disrespectfully to any race. We live in a very diverse world. So the opportunities that are in front of us, it's a paramount time in history, and we're really lucky to be here, all of us, as humanity, to be very honest with you. You know, to have that representation in front of us. There's no one in the film world right now being excluded, which is like, wow, this is a historical moment, and we get to be filmmakers. So just really food for thought. So to answer, is it bringing productions up north? I think productions were already here, and it's, bringing more opportunity for more stories.
The other thing that's great is the technology that we have nowadays. The fact that people can actually shoot, films on their iPhones or edit them on their laptops. That has really kind of helped to, allow filmmaking to be done anywhere. That you don't have to have, an Arriflex camera or even a Red, like all these or expensive lights or crazy camera rigs. So that has helped to level the playing field across the board. So that way, filmmakers can be anywhere. I saw an amazing short film that was shot in Labrador, like northern part of Labrador. And it was so damn cold that she literally, the filmmaker had to she had 5 minutes on each battery because it was so damn cold. It was killing the battery life. They had to put the batteries in their armpits and in crotches to keep them warm in between shooting, But the very fact that you could shoot a short film in that environment now is incredible, right? So.
Well, I'm going to open it up to the audience now. Any questions that you might have? And we're going to switch mics. Careful, this mic falls apart periodically. So, yeah, any question that you have? I think the panel brought up a lot of great ideas, a lot of great scenarios, and you answered things quite succinctly and quite completely, but there's still so much more. So I'm sure if anybody has anything they'd like to say. Start with him and then we'll move there. There we go.
I just want to say that from our perspective as Shattercone Films, new on the block, you haven't seen anything yet. And our mission is to create new movies based on the North. Our first project actually takes place in Sudbury in the 1920s. And it's a story that is of global interest, so it's going to be good. Just want to say that we're excited about bringing this forward and becoming part of the organization and the production and everything else. Just looking forward to it. Thank you.
So is there a response to a reaction about people starting out, coming in, bringing, when we were talking about original voices, it sounds like this is an original voice takes place in Sudbury. Any comments or thoughts on that?
I'll say the same thing I said earlier today. Any dream will do. And, when you're ready and it's time to tell the stories, it's important. It is never too late to make your films or, share your story to be able to, you have a vision and the story is important and you shared a snippet with me, but I agree with you. It is something very exciting and is welcome.
Well,
so.
and one of the things that he touched upon that's really important that filmmakers need to get into their heads is even if you're making a local story, you need to make sure that it works nationally, that it works globally, because of course filmmaking is not cheap. Even like a low-budget film, say $1 million film, $1 million isn't a lot in the film industry. But what kind of business could you start for $1 million, or what kind of real estate could you buy for $1 million? Obviously, it depends where you live, but still, $1 million is a lot of money. But in the film industry, $1 million isn't. And so you have to make sure that you're going to get a return on your investment. And in order to get a return on that investment, the film has to work worldwide. It really, truly does.
Question.
I was wondering if the genre of films that are getting made here, is it mainly for the location purposes and the landscape that here is offering, or is it because that the type of budgets that they require is feasible and doable for the infrastructures that are here, and also maybe perhaps because they have become a lot more attractive for distribution and sales purposes?
All of the above. Yeah, like again, because there's so many factors that go into making a movie that, you know, it all comes together to offer an appealing package by shooting up here. Everything has its pros and cons in life, everything. And so, you know, there is obviously, you know, some, you know, negatives of having to shoot up in the north. You know, maybe having to bring in some extra crew or people, or, you know, put people up, things like that. But again, that's then offset by then all the, you know, positive things about shooting up here. So, yeah, again, going back to what we were saying earlier, filmmaking is a difficult thing, lots of obstacles to navigate, but shooting up north offers so many great, you know, locations, people, and environments, and opportunities and incentives that it makes sense, you know, to film up here. Yeah.
And to follow up that, does that mean that majority of the productions here are genre movies?
We specialize in genre, but these guys can talk about all the films that they've worked on that aren't genre.
I don't think so. I mean, we have a full bag of different types of films that are being made here, and it's not per se just a genre film or this or a Christmas love story, which almost all of them are, as a formulaic, but it spans the gambit of filmmaking.
There's documentaries shot up here, TV series. This summer, three Tier A TV series in North Bay alone. So no, we're not limited to any genre. It's really a wide open playing field, and it's more what works. Is this location right? Is there going to be production value here? You know, some of the regions in Northern Ontario have never been on screen before, so that brings a huge production value to some of these shows. It's not a downtown Los Angeles street that we've seen a million times in a TV show. And you know, that's the creative side of what works in Northern Ontario as well. Right now, it's the cavalcade of colors all through Northern Ontario. And if it, like, fall is one of the prettiest times here, but there's only a temporary time of year where you can capture all that, right? So.
Actually, coming back to your first question, there are certain shows that are designed for specific cities. For a perfect example is Shoresy, which just came out recently as the TV series. And it's written for Sudbury. It plays Sudbury for Sudbury. Yeah. You know, all the locations, everything else. You couldn't really use another location to do all that. And Letterkenny was along the same way, where, you know, its predecessor. So there is other reasons other than, say, the financial and that sort of thing to come up, but a lot of times it's people who want to create here and want to involve the community and want to show off the communities.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, I had just a quick question with regards to, for some reason, people really seem excited to work with people here on the genre films. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to your experience. We have two production designers on the panel, about what you get to work on, maybe some things that people don't realize about the projects that are here happening, and some of the elements of that. If you can expand on that a little bit, just what you get to do in your day-to-day creation.
You wanna start that one off?
I mean, I can tell you a story in one particular instance that I hold dear. And I was working on actually, it was Lost After Dark, which was distributed by Raven Banner. And it's about a cannibal that's, you know, picking off teenagers, basically. And when...
Classic story.
Classic story. Feel good. And we were shooting in this old farmhouse that was owned by some Mennonites. And so I had the owner of the house there, and I was asking about, you know, what the plans were for the house, and, you know, could I put a hole in the wall, you know, that sort of thing. And he basically turned to me and said, he goes, listen, if you knock it down, it saves me from doing it. And then he came back after we were done, and we had a full satanic altar with all of we had like bloody baby shoes hanging from the ceiling, and, You know, all these sort of things all go, and it was him and his wife that were standing there looking at it, and it was complete silence. And so I broke the silence by saying, "Can you imagine I, pay my mortgage doing this?" And he just turned to me and said, "Everybody has to do something." So it's just one of those moments in working in genre that's really stuck with me.
I'll attest to that. Even at a farmhouse that we did shoot on a horror film called Buckout Road many years ago, and we found a farmhouse that actually wanted to be knocked down. But we ended up recreating that in studio, and just basically, the beauty of it is really making the world of make believe to film in and create and allow a story to be told through the design of the films as well, and it may be baby shoes with blood hanging one day or Christmas balls hanging somewhere else, but to that, and I'll attest to what you were mentioning, the entire community here in Northern Ontario has been very open for all of this stuff and allowing us to do these kind of imaginative scenarios that are required to do storytelling, basically, and it always changes every day as well, which is fascinating and innovating as well.
And I, just want to chime in too, just on the casting side of things, because we do extras casting and then producing. The genre films, I'm amazed by how people get right into even just a background role. A Junction Row was one of the shows. Like, I have not seen such hilarious background in a lot of the shows that I've done. Like, getting into the, putting dirt on their face and carrying toilet paper rolls. Like, it was pretty amazing to see what some of them pulled off just being background performers.
Well, and I can add to that. I directed a movie called The Fight Machine, and we shot that in Parry Sound. And we had the most amazing set of background performers. Like, we knew all their names, and the great people. They were, not just enthusiastic, but like they inhabited the roles very wonderfully and fully, and they were committed to it. And they looked great on camera, and they helped build that world. And so, they weren't jaded. They were all in it. And they were having fun with it. And it was a great addition to have as part of the film. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's about it for now. Thank you so much for being in the audience and sharing your questions and your attention. And a big thank you to our panel for your thoughts and ideas and your information, including the Evil Dead story. That one will be with me forever now. Thank you so much, and thank you.
Thank you, Thom.
Thanks.